Welcome back, everybody, to the Calaveria podcast. I'm so glad to have you guys here in our second episode. I do just want to start off by saying that I'm very happy with the response from our first one, all the feedback that we got from our friends and family. It was nice, it felt good, so I'm really excited to go into this second episode. What about you, Samantha?
Same here. I really enjoyed how we made the first one, making it, and also hearing the response. And if you don't like it, maybe you'll like this one.
Yeah, so for this episode, we have something that's a little bit different than our first one. We are going to be introducing a new series. But before we get into that, is there anything you want to address?
Yeah, I did make a mistake last episode. I called my Theo a priest. I meant to say pastor. I just made a mistake. Sorry, y'all.
Yeah, that happens. And if there is anything that we do mess up on a prior episode, we'll be sure to cover that in the beginning of the next one. But so as I mentioned, we are going to be starting a new series. And so this new series is going to be called Folklore Fridays. And for our very first episode of Folklore Friday, we're going to be doing a very special, one that I'm pretty sure everybody knows. So I think it's a good way to start off this series. And it's going to be the legend of La Llorona.
The story of La Llorona, also known as the Weeping Woman, originated from Latin America. The story is of a woman who learned her husband cheated, and so she drowned her own kids, and then herself, and continued to roam the earth as a ghost in search of her lost kids. People describe hearing her wail near bodies of water, crying for her children. Since La Llorona is an oral tradition, the true original story is unknown, but there are roughly 4 different possible origin stories. This first story takes place during the Spanish control over Latin America. A nobleman by the name of Don Muñoz de Montesclares fell in love with a woman who went by the name of Luisa. She was noted to be very beautiful, a woman of the people and faithful. The nobleman proposed a secret marriage to Luisa since they were of different classes, and she accepted it. The marriage was good. They had 3 children, and the nobleman had long visits with his wife and family. But then another woman began to catch the nobleman's eye. A noble lady from Madrid. He began to see Luisa and his kids less and less. Luisa didn't want to believe that her husband could be betraying her, but when she heard there were to be a wedding, that pushed her to go see it for her own eyes. She secretly went to the nobleman's house and saw her husband toast his new wife, and she knew the truth. She went back to their house and ripped apart everything they had together, destroying it all with a dagger, but most notably taking the life of their children. She was then found wailing in the streets, covered in blood, crying for everything she had lost. She was then executed, and her spirit remains to roam the earth in heartache. In another story, the woman's name is Maria, and she is married to a nobleman who cheats on her as well. The difference between Maria and Luisa is that Maria drowns her children in the river nearby, and upon doing so, she begins to search for her kids in the water, drowning herself in the process. In another version of the story, the spirit of a woman was seen throughout the Aztec Empire, crying and wailing for her children. It is believed this woman was the spirit of a god mourning her children, the indigenous people of the Americas, who would soon meet the foreigners that would colonize them. A possible origin of the story was the story of La Malinche. La Malinche is a native woman who went by the name of Marina to the Spaniards. She played an important role when the Spanish conquistadors came to the New World. She was the interpreter of Hernan Cortez and became his mistress. They even had a son together, but then she learned that Cortez had married a Spanish noble lady. This would break their relationship, and the rest of Marina's story was never noted down in history, leaving the rest to be filled in. All these stories have one thing in common: a woman being betrayed and mourning all that she had lost.
Today, La Llorona is primarily known for the fact that she is consistently searching for her children while crying out a very well-known saying, "Ay, mis hijos." It has also been said that La Llorona will mistakenly take other children while searching for her own. In some tellings, she is known as a vengeful spirit who will take others' kids and drown them in place of her own. Similar to a well-known Irish spirit, the Banshee, La Llorona's cries are said to be a warning of sorts, and should you hear them, would mean that your fate has already been determined. Many use the tale of La Llorona as a cautionary tale for misbehaving children, telling them that if they misbehave, La Llorona will come and get them. Alright, so just as before, now that we've gone over the lore or the background history of La Llorona, we're going to get into some stories. So Samantha and I have compiled a list of stories that we've gathered from Reddit, and they all have to do with La Llorona. So these can be different encounters or just sightings. So let's get into it. Samantha, take it away.
This first story comes from the subreddit r/paranormal from the user I Love Violet. This is a story from my mother's perspective. She told me the story when I was younger and back in my hometown of Zacatecas, Mexico. Anyways, let's get started with the story. The story takes place around 25 years ago. During the night, my mom likes to take small, simple walks around to clear her head after a day's hard work. Because it's always hot and humid during the day, she uses this time to savor the cool breeze of the silent yet peaceful night. Without a doubt, my mom thinks it's going to be a regular stroll like always, but then she hears it. Near a small lake that is a little farther away from the town, there's a girl in a white dress, walking, but crying, and she is crying. As she is crying, she hears the phrase, mis hijos. My mom knew right away that this was La Llorona, because every single person in Latin America knows of this woman. Her appearance is quite noticeable. She is always wearing a torn, white dress while her eyes are crying blood. There are many variations of how she looks, but this is how my mom described it to me. Back to the story. My mom sees this woman crying near the lake. Whenever you see something that you didn't know existed, you can't help but stare at it. La Llorona felt as if someone was staring at her, so she turned around to make eye contact with my mom. Before I continue, when my mom told me this next part, she began to pray because this event scared the living hell out of her, asking for Jesus and the Guadalupe to give her strength. After praying, she continued with the story. My mom stared clearly into the eyes of this woman to see the torn dress, the pale face, the black bags under her eyes, and the blood leaking down her eyes. What?
That's just... I can't imagine that.
Me either. My mom made eye contact with this woman for about a minute before it began to move towards her. My mom turns around and runs, full on sprint. When she arrived home, she got on her knees and prayed to the Guadalupe statue all night. When we came to America, she refused to let me go outside, not even 5 minutes, because she fears that the Llorona will get me. I believe her because I constantly feel like someone is watching me whenever I'm walking back home during the dark.
Yeah, that's a pretty good story. That is scary, like, to think that, like, I mean, the mom obviously had terrified her that much that she
just won't let her kid just walk out for 5 minutes by themselves at night. Like,
yeah, I mean, she passed it down to her kids, and now her kids are scared. So I mean,
yeah,
it's kind of like there's some generational trauma to them right there. But
yeah,
and see that thing about, you know, when we were researching these stories or looking for these stories, the idea, or I mean, the fact that like people say that she is crying blood, that is something that's new to me. I don't think I ever heard that before.
Me either. Like, the only place I've heard like a spirit crying blood was honestly like Bloody Mary or something like that.
Yeah, like something like that. I think I've heard like other, I guess, just paranormal, like I don't even know, like subjects where like it's like a statue, I think, of like a nun or something, and it just seems to cry. I think, you know what? When we went to a mission trip, I forgot where it was, somewhere in Southern California, but that mission that we went to where I ended up catching a ghost basically on camera. I think it, like, some of the stories for that place, it had like a nun or like a woman in white too that would be seen, and I think that there was like a statue that was set to like symbolize her or represent her. So I think it was a nun, and that at times it seems to like be crying blood, which is very interesting. It's kind of it's interesting how like most people have like these different stories of woman in white. And I mean, she's definitely one of those, but she's more known as the Weeping Woman. But I mean, overall, that's very scary. Very, very interesting story.
The sixth story takes place in a small town in Mexico. When my maternal grandmother died, I was 15 years old, and my uncle did not want my grandfather to be alone. So I was the one who had to go to sleep at my grandfather's house every night and keep him company. One night, after playing soccer with my friends, I was late and I knew there was no one to save me. I had to go sleep at my grandfather's house and cross the dark roads, the river, and the bridge. When I arrived at my grandfather's house, it was all normal. My dog was waiting for me. He was the one who gave him company during the day. The husky was all white and huge. I sat in the armchair next to my grandfather's bed while he was watching the TV. At 11 p.m., he turned off the television and went to bed. 20 minutes later, my dog starts to get restless, squeals, barks, and they just move a lot. That made me restless since my dog is not afraid of anything. And that's when it all started. We heard it crying, deep, full of pain. It had an echo. And every time I got closer, There was a large window between my grandfather's bed and mine. My dog underneath the bed was crying. It was a cry capable of paralyzing you, of freezing your soul, and every time I was closer to the window, I could not move. After about 3 minutes, my dog came out from under the bed to bark. The crying was gone. My grandfather laughed and told me that that's such a loud woman, doesn't let me sleep.
Why was he laughing?
I don't know. Maybe the grandfather probably heard stuff like that a lot and just thought it was funny, but I thought the ending was pretty funny, so.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like, La Llorona came and freaking scared them or took her away, but yeah, that's kind of weird. I mean, that kind of makes you think maybe the grandpa was used to that and, he just like, forget about it. But I mean, obviously the dog knew something was wrong.
Definitely, yeah.
And we've talked about that, how, these different animals can sense when there's spirits. And I know people say that too about like children too. So it's kind of, it just goes to show maybe like, I don't know, yeah, like the grandpa was just used to that baby. And obviously she wasn't or he wasn't.
I know when I was looking at other stories too, like a lot of the stories had like animals like reacting, mostly like dogs.
Mm-hmm.
So like I noticed that like was like a big pattern. Like if they had an encounter with La Llorona, like the dogs all around them would just go crazy.
Yeah, I think I've heard that too, where like they'll be howling or barking and stuff. And I mean, just thinking about hearing somebody going through the streets, this very scary, crying, screaming, like that sort of thing. Like I could imagine it'll set those animals off. Yeah,
I'll go ahead and get into my last story. This is another story from r/paranormal subreddit, and this is from the user Brenda_07. My dad will tell me his experience with La Llorona when he was younger. My dad grew up in Guanajuato, Mexico. He lived miles away from school and had to walk or ride his bike to get there, and we would pass a huge river every day. He told me how he met his first wife when he was a teenager, and she lived near the school, so he had to go by the river to go get her. He stayed out pretty late since they went on a date, and he went to her parents' house and stayed for dinner. When he was riding his bike back, he said it started to rain really hard, making it hard for him to get home since it was dark and the only source of light he had was the moonlight shining through some of the clouds. He stopped by a river to go under a big tree to go out of the rain, and when he heard noises of a woman crying. He saw a lady crying by the river. He said he instantly got chills and goosebumps, but thought it was from the rain. He said at first he didn't think it was her. He couldn't really see her face or anything since he was so far away, so all he could see was a silhouette of a woman. He decided to ask if she was okay, so he started yelling at her, asking if everything was alright, and she started crying and got quiet.
Oh no, that sounds like a bad sign.
I know. All you could hear was the rain hitting the ground, and he said he was going to go check on her, till he heard her blood-curdling scream.
Yep, there it is.
He knew he fucked up. He got on his bike and pedaled as fast as he could to get home. He got home, went to my abuelita's room, and told her what happened. They stayed up all night, praying until the next day.
I think that was a very scary encounter.
I know, especially since like he went up to the woman and she like kind of, or not even went up, just asked her if she was okay.
Uh-huh.
And like she just stopped crying like out of nowhere.
Yeah, it just shows you like, I mean, she knows what she's doing. Like this is her, I guess this is her routine. This is her job. This is what she's known for. So she's going to put on a show.
Yeah, like I just couldn't just picture in the rain, just hearing that scream out of nowhere, just after it got quiet, like the way I would have felt chills on my back.
Yeah, I mean, like riding your bike, trying to get back home, and it starts raining all of a sudden, and then you hear a woman. For one, I'm assuming it was dark, right? It was late.
Yeah.
I think that's what you mentioned in the story, so it's late.
He could only see with like the moonlight.
Exactly. It's raining, so that always adds like a scary element.
Mm-hmm.
And then you hear somebody crying by a river, and anybody who knows the story,
they had to be crying like super loud to hear over the rain as well.
Exactly. So it's anybody that knows the story, and I'm pretty sure most people do about La Llorona, they know either she killed them. Well, I mean, everyone knows she killed them, but most people think that she drowned them. So you're on your bike, raining, already scary, very dark. You hear a woman screaming, not even really crying, like screaming. And then the second you want to like check to see if she's okay, boom, instantly stops. Like, no, hell no. So, I mean, I don't blame him. He got out of there as soon as he could and, went to his grandma and started praying.
Mm-hmm.
So a very smart decision on his part.
you want to go into your stories?
Yeah, okay, so similar to Samantha's, I have my stories from r/paranormal as well. This one is from user Dreams562, and it is titled Grandma Followed La Llorona. Okay. So this is one of the many stories my mother has passed down to my siblings and I when we were very young, and I'm going to say I was about 9 to 10 years old, and they took place in Central America, El Salvador to be precise. My grandma one day was supposed to meet up with a friend to go to another friend's wake, back then when people would stay all night mourning at the wake with the deceased. My grandma was waiting for her friend, where they had agreed to meet, which happened to be nearby a little river/creek. She sees this woman from far away, all in white, and my grandma says it looked just like her friend. Her name was Mary. So she starts following the woman, calling out for her, thinking it's her friend. She followed her by the river, and then she kept calling out to her, but no answer. It starts getting creepy. This is when the woman is going towards these trees, away and away from my grandmother, as she starts catching up to her. But as soon as she gets closer, she says she starts to feel that her shoulders and her head were beginning to feel heavy, and she couldn't move anymore. She was close enough to see this woman's face, and that was covered by a veil, and she said that the woman's face was a skull.
What the heck?
Right, like, that's a whole nother level.
Yeah.
My grandma somehow came out of her shock and ran as fast as she could. She said she felt as if she was running slow and wasn't getting away fast enough. See, that kind of reminds me of like running in your dream or something.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, kind of like when you're running in your dreams from something.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird, but you know, let's keep going. These stories always gave me the chills, but have always been fascinating. She states that it was the Llorona, or the weeping woman, because she was walking by the river. They passed it and headed towards some trees. So, yeah, I mean, that's the story.
That's crazy. Like, she saw, like, a skull as for the face?
Yeah, like, it kind of, I mean, have you seen the movie? Or, I mean, maybe if you haven't, it's pretty old now. What is it? Ghost Rider.
Yeah, Ghost Rider.
Like, that, I don't know why that's what I pictured.
That's what you thought.
It's like La Llorona's on a motorcycle or something. She's about to take off.
With a freaking skull on fire.
Yeah, but that's very scary. Like, she was going to a wake, and, you know, she's waiting for her friend. And, of course, like I said before, that body of water, she was by a river or, like, a creek. And who's there? La Llorona. Or, no, not even there. She wasn't there. She was following her there.
Yeah.
And so it was like she was going back to her spot. And maybe it was like, who knows? Maybe La Llorona didn't like that this old lady was following her. And so she's like, hey, let me scare her away. But, it was, I mean, I don't know.
That story is pretty scary, honestly. Like,
yeah, and I mean, that's part of the reason why I chose it. And just because, I mean, also, they said it's from Central America, El Salvador. So that just goes to show La Llorona is universal. Mm-hmm. And going off on that point, this is another story just to show just how universal she is. So this one is also from r/paranormal, and this is from user TJ Shuck, and this is called I've Seen La Llorona. Last night was very unusual. My girlfriend and I got into a pretty big fight, and I was exhausted from it, and I just didn't want to fight anymore. She finally said to me, I don't want to look at your face. So I said, fine, you don't have to. And so at about 9 o'clock, I gathered my pillows and I went to go lay down on the couch, and I fell asleep. Then at about 2:30 on the dot almost, I had to use the restroom, so I went and did that. Then came back and laid down on the couch. I just got this weird feeling that it was too quiet in the house, so I poked my head in the bedroom to check. My girlfriend was fast asleep, and our 10-month-old son was sound asleep as well in his crib. I figured, what the hell, I'm over it, and I slowly climbed into bed and I went to sleep. Now, I live in Arizona. It's been kind of a rainy and cool, the last couple of days, and to us, that's nice. So our bedroom window was open. There was a nice slow breeze coming in. It was very relaxing. All of a sudden, I'm awoken by my son. He was crying very loudly, and he was standing up in his crib, which is very unusual. Unlike most babies, he has slept through the night since he was born. Sure, he makes his little noises, rolls around a little, but usually he finds his pacifier and dozes back off to sleep. Anyways, I opened my eyes to see my girlfriend has already gotten to him, and she picks him up and all of a sudden stops crying. I check the time. It's 3 a.m. I'm like, maybe it's just one of those nights. So she brings him over and puts him between us. He rolls, makes noises, but doesn't want to go back. So she makes him a bottle. While he's eating, I doze back off to sleep. Now, I'm dreaming. But I'm still in my bed, in the same position. It's dark, and everything's quiet, except I can hear someone crying, weeping, and moaning like a woman grieving somebody close to her who just passed away. It's a long, drawn-out cry, and it's eerie, like the breeze coming through the window. All of a sudden, I jolt awake, my eyes wide open, with sweat dripping down my forehead. I can still hear the cry, but this time, I know I'm awake, so I know it's real.
Oh my god.
Right? I spin, turn around fast, and that's when I see her. She's tall, dressed in all black, like she just came back from a funeral. Her face is stressed, like she had been mourning for eternity. The wind coming through the window behind her is strong, and the curtain is blowing like a flag. I see her as she reaches for my son, who was lying asleep between me and my girlfriend, so I did what any father would do. I grabbed the blanket with my left hand and came down with my arm over my son. I had the blanket covering both of us, and I held onto him tight. All of a sudden, a sheer scream rings out with what I assume to be the woman, and a gust of wind hits the window hard. Boom! And then, quiet. Nothing but my girlfriend snoring, and my son breathing, and my very heavy breathing. So I lie awake for a little while, and eventually fall back asleep, still clutching my son. I woke up this morning and asked my girlfriend if she heard anything last night. She says, yeah, I thought I heard somebody crying, but it sounded like it was coming from outside. At that point, I knew it was real. Now, I'm a big guy, burly with a beard, I'm not afraid of much, and I was a tough kid growing up. But when I was a kid, I was afraid of one thing. After I went to a friend's house and his uncle told us the story of La Llorona and Mexican folklore, I always believed it was real. I never really wanted to stay outside after dark, and I never told anyone because, like I said, it was tough, and I didn't want my friends to think I'm a pussy. But she is real. I'll be keeping a closer eye on my son from now on. So what do you think?
That story's crazy, honestly. Like, just seeing that, like, well, I think it was kind of strange that he said, like, it was, La Llorona was, like, in a black dress, I think. I thought that was, like, kind of strange, but other than that, like, just picturing, like, some, like, spirit reaching for your son like that. Yeah. I could only imagine how he felt.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a couple things with this story that, like, really caught my attention. Like, how you mentioned with the black dress, that was very unique. Usually she's always seen, you know,
in
stereotypical,
white,
white dress. And, I mean, it reminded me of, like, the Conjuring movies where they had, like, what was it? I mean, I don't know if it's Conjuring, but I think one of them.
It's one of those, like, in the series.
Right? Mm-hmm. Like, there's, like, I mean, a demon or a spirit with that black dress on. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, another thing, too, is, like, the fact that it was in his dream.
Yeah, and he, like, woke up and he still heard it.
Yeah, and, I mean, that reminds me of the story I told on the last episode, like, when I fell asleep listening to the song, and the song was still in my dream. So, I mean, that, I don't know, that was just something that, like, was just following him from his dream. And if that is the case, then...
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's very scary. But, yeah, and, like, even then, like, his girlfriend confirmed it, too.
Yeah, like, she heard it, but she did say, like, it sounded like it was outside, so, like... Mm-hmm. Maybe, like, it was mainly coming after him and his son, so maybe that's why he heard it more, or I don't know.
Yeah, and, like, I mean, she must be a very sound sleeper if, like, all that went on, trying to grab the kid, and he runs out of the room, and she's just asleep the entire time, like, not even noticing.
I don't know.
Yeah, it was very weird, and then she just, like, vanishes, like, disappears after that. So, I mean, like I said, it goes to show another way that she is universal. I'm assuming this is in the States. I mean, well, yeah, never mind. He mentions he was in Arizona.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, I mean, the show's like La Llorona, not just in Mexico, not just in Latin America, but also, you know, here in the U.S. too. And, yeah, it's just very, very scary. And, you know, she doesn't discriminate. She goes after all kinds of people. Okay. And so for my last story that I have, I saved this one for last for a reason. It's pretty long, so, you know, bear with me. So this is from user DJ Underdog 85. It's titled, She is Real, a La Llorona Story. This happened to me when I was about 11 years old. It was the 90s. I have lived my whole life in El Paso, Texas. The culture is rich in folklore and religious beliefs. Many Hispanic families have stories of the paranormal. One popular legend is the legend of the Weeping Woman, aka La Llorona. The legend of La Llorona, Spanish for the Weeping Woman, has been a part of the Hispanic culture in the Southwest since the days of the conquistadors. The tall, thin spirit is said to be blessed with natural beauty and long, black flowing hair. Wearing a white gown, she roams the rivers and creeks, wailing into the night and searching for her children to drag, screaming to a watery grave. No one really knows when the legend of La Llorona began or from where it originated, though the tales vary from source to source. The one common thread is that she is a spirit of a doomed mother who drowned her children and now spends eternity searching for them in rivers and lakes. One night, just like any other night, I lived in the trailer with my mom and my dad. My youngest brother was staying with my aunt this night. I fell asleep watching Jay Leno as usual, and when I woke up, I was on the sofa in my living room. The time was 4 a.m., which illuminated from the stove in the kitchen. The television was off, and normally I had a light on, but this time it was pitch black. I woke up and I heard a horrible screaming that was coming from far in the distance. The screaming was coming from a ditch that was a few feet away from the home. I heard it and I thought to myself, am I hearing things? I asked myself, am I dreaming? And then I started to hear the animals outside howling and whimpering. These animals that I speak of are cats and dogs. As the screaming got closer, the animals continued to cry. The screaming was something I have never experienced ever before. It sounded like I was in a big hallway and a woman was screaming her guts out down that hallway. Then, in all of the screaming, I started to make out the words. These words being said by whoever this was at 4 a.m. screaming their guts out shocked me. The woman said, in a huge panic, I quickly got up from the sofa and ran to the kitchen, which was right next to where I was asleep. I turned the closet light and looked around. The screaming didn't stop. In fact, the screaming only got louder and closer. I questioned my sanity at that moment. Was I going crazy or hearing things? Then I thought to myself, this is real and the animals are responding to it in a negative way. So I did what any other 11-year-old boy would do in a moment like this. I ran to my mom and dad's room. I reached for my mom and shook her awake wildly. She woke up slowly, and to my amazement, the screaming faded away as she woke up. I thought to myself, what the heck is going on? I told my mother, Mom, do you hear that screaming and the crying? My mom was half asleep and she said, go back to sleep. It's most likely just your imagination. I told her, no, this is real. Please, listen, don't you hear her? My mom quickly just said, you are dreaming, so go back to sleep. It's going to be okay. By then, the screaming had faded long away, like if whoever was screaming knew that an adult was awake. I was terrified as I returned to the living room and quickly turned on the television as I left most of the lights on as well. I didn't go back to sleep until the sun came up. I couldn't believe what I had heard and witnessed. I was treated like a crazy person whenever I told the story. It got so bad that I kept my experience to myself. To this day, I don't care what people think of my experience, I know what I heard. A couple of years later, it happened to me again. This story takes place after the first incident with the woman known as La Llorona. Not much happened after the first time I heard her. An incident occurred with my aunt about a year after the encounter. According to my aunt, they were sleeping and suddenly there was a horrible sound coming from the ditch located in front of their house. There's a street in between the ditch and the house, but her house and the ditch are really close to one another. It was about 2:30 a.m. when my aunt was awakened by a screaming woman coming from the ditch. She figured maybe somebody was being hurt or attacked. She walked out to the front yard looking towards the ditch and saw that there was no woman. My cousin, her daughter, walked out to the front as well, asking what was happening. My aunt, of course, had no idea what the screaming was, and it grew closer. Then they saw her, a woman in a white dress. The only thing that shook them to the bone was that the woman had no feet and was clearly floating. One other feature that threw them off was that the woman had no face. They both just turned after seeing that and ran inside their house. My aunt locked the door and called the police. The police showed up minutes later and took their claim seriously. El Paso PD was soon looking at the area where this woman was seen and heard the screaming. The police soon returned and said that there was no evidence that a woman was there. They looked at the area where the woman was, seen walking, and not even a footprint was found. One of the police officers even asked if maybe my aunt was dreaming that everything had happened. The next day is when I went over to visit and I saw my cousin like I'd never seen her before. She had black bags in her eyes and she hasn't slept since the incident. I asked her what happened, and she said that she saw what my aunt saw. The screaming woman with no feet and no face. It took her a while to sleep normal again. She never heard or saw La Llorona again. But to this day, she won't deny that she witnessed La Llorona, and that's something that she can't explain. Unlike my cousin, I don't have the luck of avoiding La Llorona. It was in the early 2000s when I worked here in El Paso, Texas at a local supermarket named Big 8. One of the shifts that I worked was from 3 a.m. to 12 p.m. This store was located in the lower valley of El Paso. In the back of the store, there's a small ditch. One early morning at about 4 a.m., I had the back doors open and I was taking the empty milk crates outside in the back. I was working with 2 other guys at the time of this incident. One of the guys named R thought it would be funny to close the back doors and lock me outside as a joke. When I heard the doors close shut, I knew he was just messing around. I thought to myself, I would just stay quiet and wait for him to open the doors again. I wasn't going to give in to his little joke of trying to scare me. I stood by the door smiling and thinking to myself, he is not going to scare me. I could hear R laughing at the other side of the doors. I thought to myself, well, the joke is on him because I am not scared. About 1 minute later, in the far distance, I heard screaming. I heard, and I thought to myself, it's the same screaming that I heard when I was 11 years old. The screaming got louder and closer to me. I felt a chill down my spine, and I felt that I was being watched by some unseen force. I felt a sense of hopelessness. It was a feeling unlike any other. I started pounding on the door. I yelled, "Let me in! There's somebody out here!" I pounded my fist and started kicking the door. "What the fuck? Let me in!" I could hear R laughing on the other side of the door. I started to kick the door harder. The screaming was now coming right behind me. Just then, R opened the door and said, "What the fuck is that?" Just then, I ran inside and I locked the warehouse door. R said, "Why was that lady screaming? Did she need help?" I told him that I don't think that was a lady. I told him what happened to me when I was younger. R told me, "Jay, don't you think maybe you're cursed or she's following you?" I stayed quiet when he told me that. I couldn't work my shift normally after that. It took a few hours to get over what happened. I admit, I was scared and maybe R was right. What if she was following me? There's one more incident that took place right after. In 2015, I started working as a custodian at Cedar Grove Elementary. Behind the school is the border highway. Then the Rio Grande, of course, covered by a huge metal fence that separates Mexico from El Paso. I worked the night shift from 2:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. One night, I was stuck working with another custodian until midnight. Right when we were about to leave, we do a walkthrough of the school to make sure that all the doors are locked on the outside. I worked with another custodian named C. C always told me that he has never really believed in ghosts. Up until that night, I can say. We walked to our cars, and just as I was about to leave, I saw that C had opened his hood of his car. Then he asked me, "Hey Jay, can you give me a jump? My car battery's dead." I told him yes, of course. Just as I stepped out of my car, a loud screaming came from the Rio Grande. All the animals in the nearby neighborhood started howling and crying. Once again, the screaming resembled a woman screaming her guts out in the hallway, as it echoed all over. C looked at me and said, "Oh my God, is that a demon?" I told him no, that is La Llorona. He looked right at me and said, "No way, she can't be real." Then I said, "I have heard her before." Then C said, "Hurry, please, let's get out of here." I gave him a jump, and just when we saw a Border Patrol Jeep speeding towards the screaming woman, just then I thought to myself, I can record this and share it with the world. I took my phone out, and just as I hit record, the screaming faded away. C and I looked at each other and had said, "What the fuck?" "Sorry, Jay. I'm leaving before that evil witch comes back to get us." We both left, and the very next day, C was telling everybody at work how he had heard the witch crying the night before. And that was the last time that I encountered her.
That story is like so long and so crazy. Like all those experiences that he had with La Llorona, like his aunt, him, like...
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of this story, is that it's not just his encounters, it's like, his family too. And he's had people who also heard it, like, with him.
His co-workers,
Yeah. At 2 different places that he worked at, he's had co-workers hear it. And I think one thing that really stood out to me while I was reading that story was the fact that he kept mentioning that there was like a ditch nearby, like a ditch.
Yeah, I noticed that too when you were reading it.
And I don't know if that's just because he never really says that he never seen it. I know he mentioned his cousin, his they saw it
with no feet and no face.
Yeah, but he never seen it. So I don't know if that has something to do with the ditch, just that she's like kind of like in the ditch, trying not to reveal herself, or she chooses who to reveal herself to. But yeah, it's scary. And the fact that too was like, this also shows she does travel, because the Rio Grande, she's on the other side and they heard it. So very, very scary. He's had 3 encounters, and I mean, if
and
I were
each
him,
time he was able to tell, like, that's La Llorona, like, just from her scream.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would imagine. I mean, I've never heard it.
Me either.
I pray that I'd never hear that. But yeah, like I would imagine it's something that you don't forget. It will strike that fear in you that you just know, like, if I ever hear this again, it's game over. But very crazy stuff for him to do that, 3 times in a row. And I mean, even then, like the whole prank thing too, like, oh man, I would have been so pissed if my coworker was trying to play a prank on me and freaking demon over here trying to get me. But yeah, but before we end with these La Llorona stories, we do have a very special story that comes from our grandma. And I know we mentioned it in the last episode. She has lots and lots of weird, strange encounters. And so this one, keeping theme with, our episode of La Llorona, this is a La Llorona encounter that my grandma had. So just a little bit of setup. This story takes place in Chihuahua, Mexico. This is originally where she's from, and this is where my grandpa's also from. So this takes place when she was staying at my tita's house, which is my great-grandma. So let's get into it. Your tita told me about a woman who killed her children and would cry for them. She would walk through the streets and cry. I had always heard about La Llorona, but I never had seen her until one day. This story takes place when one of your tios was a baby. One night your tita told me, let's see if you finally get to hear La Llorona today. Your tio began to cry, and that's when I suddenly heard a very, very loud cry. I heard, and it seemed to get closer and closer, and growing louder and louder. I lifted one of the blinds up to see what it was, and I saw a woman in a long, white, flowing garment with her arms spread out wide, but I couldn't see her face. She continued to cry out, As soon as I saw her, I put the blinds back down and I stepped back. I continued to hear the cries of La Llorona, but I never saw her again.
That's... What the heck? I never heard that story. I know you told me, like, before this episode that she did have a story, but, like, just hearing that, oh my gosh.
Yeah, and so, like, originally, I guess what she had told me is that it, like, I guess she'd never seen it, but she did. I just didn't hear her correctly. And when she was telling me the story, I thought it was so, like, weird and just scary how my tita was just like, yeah.
Oh, maybe you'll see her.
You'll see her today, maybe, or you'll get to hear her. Because when she was explaining the stories to me, she kind of told me that tita would tell her that she would hear it. And that, like, basically the way that grandma described it to me was that, like, the little neighborhoods, maybe one day you'll hear it in this neighborhood and then the next one, and
kinda like
your neighborhood. Yeah, like she was moving through each one, making her rounds, but you wouldn't hear it every day. And it just seemed like it was something so nonchalant, like, yeah,
kind of like that one story of the grandpa where the guy was just like, oh, that lady, she's so loud, she doesn't let me sleep.
Yeah, like, yeah, it's just like,
so
oh,
nonchalant
yeah,
about it.
Just forget about her. But, it's just like weird, like, oh, it's like seeing like the elotero, like, oh, hopefully he comes by today, it's just like, it's so weird, so nonchalant. But, yeah, I mean, that part just kind of made me feel weird. And I thought it was interesting. We've heard these stories now. We've heard quite a few today on this episode. Again, not being able to see her face, that long white flowing thing.
And if they did, her face was kind of different in each story.
Yeah, I mean, one said it was a skull, another one you couldn't really see it. People talk about seeing blood
come out her eyes.
Yeah, it's interesting the way, like, she has these different, like, iterations, different forms. And it just goes to show, I mean, La Llorona isn't just this one stagnant, like, entity. She is many. She looks different. She is all over the world. I know many different cultures have these
different, like, stories that kind of are similar to La Llorona.
Right. Yeah. And so, like, everybody really has, like, their own weeping woman, but I think she is unique because, I mean, when I was going into, like, the history or the lore behind her, many people use this as stuff to, like, caution their children, like, hey, you better behave because she's going to come for you.
Especially, like, if you stay up late at night, she's going to come for you.
So, like that, I mean, we've had a story, too, where somebody was scared, and to this day, they're scared to stay up, and now, brought it on to their kids, and it's just that story that will stick with generations, and it's just more like a cultural thing. It's just interesting, and it's really, overall, it's just really interesting. It's really cool. As much as it is scary, it is very, very cool to think about that it's something that, like, lots of people share. And this one thing that we all have in common, you know, this fear of La Llorona.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all stories. And, I mean, you know, as I said, as scary as it is, I mean, it's something that we cherish. And, yeah, I mean, before we go out, we do want to just talk about this video. I sent Samantha this TikTok video, and we'll go ahead and post it on the Calaveria Pod Instagram. If you guys want to follow us, it's at Calaveria Pod on Instagram. Or there you guys could submit your stories to us. You can send it to us through a DM, or you can email it to us at calaveriapod@gmail.com. That's calaveriapod@gmail.com, just like our Instagram. So basically, this video shows, it looks like, you know, surveillance footage, or like, you know, kind of like a ring camera thing, where this woman is like running away. You know, it shows her at first, and then in like the corner of the video, you start seeing like this thing. That's the best way I can describe it. It looks like it has like animal legs. Like, to me, I thought of like the Chronicles of Narnia. That guy, you know, everyone says that he looks like that one rapper. What is his name?
I don't know.
Jack Harlow. There you go. People make fun of him, but like, yeah, I mean, like his hind legs, like it looks like, you know, he's standing on 2 feet, or she, or I don't even know what it is.
The thing.
Yeah, it's standing on their, you know, 2 legs, right? Like, you know, normal human, but it just looks like it has hooves. And
it's just like, I'm watching it right now. It's just so weird to see.
Yeah, like, and I mean, it's something that I've never heard of. I know I'm not going to even try to butcher that name. You guys check out the video on our Instagram. You'll be able to see what it's called. But it's weird because in the beginning of the video, too, they accompany like a little like stock image that kind of shows like it transforming. It kind of reminds me of, you know, many different indigenous people have their stories of like shapeshifters.
Mm-hmm. Where like a human can shapeshift into like an animal or something like that. Like,
yeah, and I mean, that's what it reminded me of. And it's just weird because like the woman, again, in the beginning of the video, she's running away. She's running inside the house.
She's trying to like open her thing. She's kind of like, I don't know if let me check again, but I think she like turns around like as if she sees something.
Yeah, it looks like she kind of like, she knows it's after her. So that is scary in and of itself, you know. And yep, shortly after she goes inside, if something starts coming out and like nothing, just walking. And it looks like it's walking through like their driveway, you know. So imagine somebody walking through your driveway and it's a creature, you know, it's not a person.
Yeah, and they have like hooves for feet, like.
Yeah, and well, I mean, we just wanted to end on something to like kind of pick your guys' brain. Let us know what you guys think.
Yeah, and if you guys have any videos like that, feel free to tag us. We have a TikTok now. It's like our Instagram, calaveriapod. So feel free to follow us, tag us on any videos you see that you guys think is interesting. Yep,
and again, if you guys have a suggestion for a story or something that you think we should cover, please let us know at calaveriapod@gmail.com. You guys can also send in your personal stories there. So, Samantha, anything else?
No, I think that's all we have for you guys today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Bye.